Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Dominic of Silos. Our top story tonight, reaction is pouring in today following a historic decision by the Colorado Supreme Court to take former President Donald Trump off the state's primary ballot. The unprecedented decision disqualifies Trump from holding the presidency under the Constitution's so-called Insurrection Clause. Section 3 of the Civil War-era 14th Amendment prohibits anyone who has previously taken an oath of office from holding public office if they, quote, engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. The former president has not been charged explicitly with insurrection or rebellion in any of his criminal cases. Trump is expected to appeal the decision, likely setting up a showdown in the United States Supreme Court. And while Trump may be the frontrunner in the Republican primary election right now, even his GOP rivals criticize the ruling by the Colorado Supreme Court.
I do not believe Donald Trump should be prevented from being president of the United States by any court. I think he should be prevented from being president of the United States by the voters of this country.
There was no trial on any of this. They basically just said, what, you can't be on the ballot? Could we just say that Biden can't be on the ballot because he let in 8 million illegals into the country and violated the Constitution, which he has?
I pledge to withdraw from the Colorado GOP primary ballot unless and until Trump's name is restored. And I demand that Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie and Nikki Haley do the same thing, or else these Republicans are simply complicit.
Here with more on the decision out of the Centennial State and how it could influence the 2024 election is John Malcolm, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and a constitutional law expert. John, great to be with you today. We appreciate it. So talk to us about how the Colorado court arrived at this decision. As you know, former President Trump has not been convicted of anything related to January 6th.
Yeah, so there are 7 justices on the Colorado Supreme Court. They were all appointed by Democratic governors, by the way. 4 of the justices in an unsigned opinion per curiam, so we don't know which justice wrote it, decided that Donald Trump did, in fact, engage in an insurrection through his conduct leading up to and including what happened on January 6, 2021, and that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to him. It basically says if you were formerly a federal official and you took an oath to defend the Constitution and then you engage in an insurrection, you are disqualified from holding federal office. They said that this was a self-executing provision. It didn't require any additional action by Congress to implement it. The Colorado's election code provided a procedure that allowed for this kind of a determination, and that Donald Trump met it, and that there was also an argument that Donald Trump made, I think it's a pretty good one actually, that the Insurrection Clause was not meant to apply to a president or vice president. It was meant to apply to appointed officials and certain designated elected officials like senators and congressmen who are specifically mentioned in that provision, but not to the president or vice president. The court rejected all of that. 3 of the justices on the Colorado Supreme Court dissented from that ruling. They each wrote a separate dissent. 2 of them said that Colorado's procedures are just woefully deficient to make a determination as complex and fact-intensive as this, and that he was deprived of due process through this procedure. The 3rd justice not only said that, but also said that this disqualification provision, the Insurrection Clause, is not self-executing. It requires an act of Congress. No such act of Congress exists. The closest analogy is the criminal law provision that you just cited that would, criminalize anyone who engages in an insurrection, but that Donald Trump has not been convicted or even charged with violating that statute.
So, John, despite this ruling, is it possible he could remain on the ballot in Colorado?
Well, not at the moment. So the court stayed its ruling until, I forget, it's either January 4th or 5th, to allow for an appeal. Donald Trump certainly will appeal. And they said that, look, if he does appeal, then our order will be stayed until we get some further direction from the Supreme Court, either denying the appeal or accepting the appeal, whatever the Supreme Court says. There are cases like this pending in at least 13 other states. Today, the California lieutenant governor sent a letter to the Secretary of State urging the Secretary to consider all legal arguments to try to disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot in California. I think it's highly likely that the Supreme Court of the United States will hear this case, even though they probably don't want to. So this is probably not the last word that we've heard on this subject.
John, has this ever happened before in the history of the United States?
Certainly not. So this provision was enacted again as part of the 14th Amendment because you had a lot of former federal officials, judges, congressmen who sided with the South during the Civil War, and then after the war wanted to return to their former positions. In fact, Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, tried to become a senator. So this provision was put in place to try to keep them from doing that. Although even eventually there's a provision that says Congress can waive this disqualification clause by a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. And ultimately they decided to do that for all of the former people who had fought on behalf of the Confederacy. But no, nothing like this has happened. Actually, something like this did happen recently to a local elected official in New Mexico who was in the Capitol on January 6th. There was an effort made to disqualify him from holding office, and the judge ruled against him. That case was not appealed. But that's the only instance that I know of where this has ever happened.
Well, this is going to be definitely something to watch, and we will be watching it. John, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate your time, as always. God bless.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.